First, I just want to take a moment and ask for respect from the original peoples of this area, the Algonquin tribes, including the Lenape, Osage, Shawnee, Miami. I come here with respect to your lands. So I just want to acknowledge the original people here. My name is Roxanne Swentzell. I am from the tribal village of Kap-o-Owinge. It was later changed to Santa Clara Pueblo in northern New Mexico. I am Rose B. Simpson's mom. She's pretty amazing. I did raise 6 children. I am a grandmother of 4. And I am very, very honored to be here. To the Clay community here at NCECA 2023, we are a family. We are a community of Clay people. I am so honored here to speak with you today. I've been wondering for months what I was going to talk about. After scanning all the topics I could think of, I became aware of my limits in one way or another. Feeling unworthy of speaking, I began to cry. This picture is called Community Family. I made it for the Civic Center of Santa Fe. It's a 21-foot long relief that is made to stay on a wall. You can see the size of it, me laying next to one of the pieces. It's about community. If you look in the center of it, there's a small child being held by parents, and then the grandparents around, great-grandparents, and then our ancestors. And as a flowering of human beings, we all are communities to either our genetic family or community of interest or within towns. So I think of us here as a family of Clay people. In the silence, as I was crying, I sank into myself. I wish I could say that I was able to rise above the harsh words of my mind, but instead I continued to cry. The tears led me back to my childhood. Soon I found myself in the memory of myself at 3 or 4 years of age. I felt my innocence and openness, and I remembered what I have to give, the only thing I have to give, myself, my story. As a young child, I struggled with a speech impediment. Words were hard to form, and so communication was frustrating. I needed to tell my mother what was going on with me, and I couldn't use words. This piece is of one of our clans called Pueblo Kosharis. They're clowns from our tribe, and he is taking off his stripes in order to find out who he is underneath the name tagging or identity we put on ourselves. He's looking underneath. My mother worked with clay. She began to throw pots on the wheel. Even though she grew up with traditional knowledge of clay use, she put the two together. She actually dug her own clays that she threw on the wheel, using even high-fired clays and glazes she found in the landscape, as did her mother before her. I come from a long line of Native American Pueblo women who gathered and worked the clay, and for thousands of years, they handed this clay knowledge down to their daughters. In this image is our village, the village I come from, Santa Clara Pueblo. And you can see the women carrying water jars on their heads. That's how we used to go get water from the creek and carry it back to our village. And the pots on the top are actual pots from my ancestors that have been handed down to me. And the women on the right are of my great-great-grandmother and my grandmother. We made cooking pots, water jars, cups, ceremonial bowls, burial pots, seed jars. We even plastered our adobe homes with clay and polished our clay floors with river stones. We found clay in the landscape wherever we roamed and knew which clay was best for what, even which ones are good to eat and which ones are good to wear on our bodies. Clay is in my blood. She is family. When my mother handed me some of her clay, I did what all 3-year-olds do. I tasted her, smeared her between my fingers, smelled her and moved her around on different surfaces. I watched her dry and crack. I added water and watched her smear. I felt the smoothness and the grogginess of different clays. As a human child, I was introducing myself to clay, and she was getting to know me. Before we could create together, we needed to know each other. In our tribal language, Jirnang Kujo Ibiak Kindi, Mother Earth, I face you raw with myself. You have to introduce yourself to the clay with an open heart, full of respect and gratitude, asking her if you can take some of her and make something. She might say no, so listen. What would yes look like? What would no look like? Growing up in a tribal community where, everything is seen as alive and is to be respected and treated with respect. It's an interesting event to come to NCECA and to see so many people working with clay, but also having this feeling inside me of wanting to remind people that this clay is not a thing or an object to just use because it's there, but that the way we interact with her and the way we move with her matters. I forget the Japanese man that studied crystals, water crystals, and how he realized that the way you spoke or treated water created different crystals in the water. And I thought, this is so brilliant because this fits into our belief as Native people that whatever we do affects it. So if you think about, you know as a person that is mostly water, that when people say not nice things to you, you crumble. You feel really bad. You change, your crystal waters change. And when people say really good things about you, something about you changes also. It's the same with clay. It's full of water. How we treat her affects her. So when we go and collect clay or move her around, remember that she also has these crystals that are changing because of our actions and reactions to her. If you take without permission, she will be angry, of course, as any other mother would. But like most mothers, she also is very generous and willing to give so much when treated well. This piece is called Sitting on Our Mother's Back, and she represents the earth, and the little figures on her back are obviously us. And how we sometimes, this piece I made as a reminder that, we use our mother constantly, but we don't necessarily acknowledge it. We eat from her, we sit on her, we mine her, we do whatever we do, but we don't necessarily stop and say, thank you, thank you. Clay can mirror whatever energy we put into her. She is the ultimate reflector, the great mirror. She imprints our moods, our frustrations, our joys. She can hold all of it. She is most certainly a mother. This piece is called Remembering the Kiss. I laugh at the time I tried to fool the clay into creating something happy when I was in a really bad mood. I was like, people like happy things, so I'll make a happy sculpture. Of course, I wasn't feeling it, But I was really working at clay, and I was like, I'm gonna make this happy piece. And finally, I stepped back to see progress, and I had to laugh at myself because that sculpture was really looking frustrated, smiling. It was like, I'm smiling, I'm happy. Of course it wasn't happy. And I laughed at myself because I know better than this. I know that clay wouldn't lie back to me. It was showing exactly how I was feeling, not what I wanted it to do. To the left is a piece I made called The Door. Again, it's kind of like that clown piece, kind of, looking inside ourselves to find out what really is in there. We present a lot of things. We get brought up to be certain ways because of our society thinking, but who are we really in the inside? I learned to speak through clay at 4 years old. She gave me my first understandable language. I made small figures in clay that my mother gave me. I had a hard time in school because of not being able to speak. And I remember making a small girl crying at her school desk and gave it to my mother. She could then understand what I wanted to tell her. I spoke volumes through clay. Even after I gradually learned to speak in words, I still find that the language of clay has a depth that words cannot hold. I think it's because it's not just me talking. It's the clay talking with me. I'm not alone. She's helping me find a way to express. Kunta, Nambijira, Nangkujo, thank you, my Earth Mother, for your help. This piece is called Strong Heart. I've heard people say, oh, they have a heart of gold, and gold being like the place, the achievement that you aim for. And it's interesting that in my culture, to have the best heart that you could have is to have a heart of earth. So when they say, be aking ing dagiri, you be strong like the earth in your heart. I love that. So this piece is called Strong Heart because she is connecting. She's reminding us to stay close to the ground, stay close to our mother. She will help us be strong if we stay by her. So we all grow up and lose so much of our childhood wonder and sense of awe in order to go work and make money. And of course, I have a gallery now that I put all my pieces in. It's my big sculpture warehouse storage. And I love making billboards to put on it to catch people's attention on the highway. But I also have to keep remembering, this is bigger than our little ideals of wealth and society. We get caught up in the perspectives of all our societies that we are a part of and become limited, actually, by these views. One of the most amazing things any of us can do is step out of our comfort zone for a little bit, step out of our usual perspectives, and actually really take a moment to experience somebody else's perspective or something else's perspective, because it makes you realize that it's not just one way. There's many, many ways to see things. This piece is called Remote Woman. And she's dazing off into cyberspace. I didn't have a television for a very, very long time. And then I met somebody who had to watch football. So we got a TV, and all of a sudden, everyone was like watching this box. And I was so caught by how, for so many years, not looking at a screen, you just, you're more aware of your environment. And then all of a sudden, this screen comes on and everyone has this daze. And you click. Oh my gosh, I broke so many sculptures because I was like trying to watch the show while I was And then I'd be like, oh, I forgot what I was doing. So of course I had to make a piece of what I was going through and called it The Remote Woman, with that daze we all know. This piece I made recently, and I'm still digesting her, because as a child, when I learned to speak through clay and I made the figures to speak for me, I found out that they helped me see myself back too. Not only was I communicating to others around me, it was communicating to myself as well. This piece I made for the Studio Potter in Philadelphia show, and it's called Put Down the Man Baby. And it's really about, even though he's making a loud noise, it's really about her. It's really about me. It's really about all of us who need to look at ourselves and decide, how are we enabling some things to be happening around us that we shouldn't be allowing anymore? And I call it the man baby, but it could be, a woman baby. It could be your mom baby. It could be dad baby. It could be your kid's baby. The only baby that should be in that hand is a baby. So it's, a message from myself to go, come on, can you put down your man babies? Let them grow up, because the relationship is not well. When I was making it, I had just finished the baby, man baby, and my granddaughter, Cedar, who's here, came over and she was excited. Oh, Grandma, you made the baby. And she comes over and she looked at me and she says, Grandma, something's terribly wrong. And I said, yes, something is terribly wrong. We grow up and we try to be what society tells us to be. And a lot of the world teaches us to be separate from each other, separate from the natural world around us, separate from those other people, separate from, gender separates, all the separates we make. So I had to make some figures that played off of that. And these Pueblo clowns are talking about our separateness and helping us to remember how we aren't that separate. The one on the left is called the therapist. And he and she are in therapy. But they're polarized in their points of view so much that there's this huge gap between them. And how do we find the heart between us again? How do we find the connections between us again? The clown on the right is a checkerboard clown, and he represents the earth. The checkerboard checkers are all of us fighting over perspectives, who's right, who's wrong. But we're all, whoever loses, we all lose. Nobody wins when we're all in this boat together. So how do we find these connections that make us not be so separate anymore? The thing that I learned through clay, through our Mother Earth here, is the practice of connection, the practice of remembering that how you affect each other, how you treat each other really does affect each other. What we do to each other is changing the crystals, definitely. This figure is called trust. I have to laugh because there's not an ounce of trust in them, but we try so hard to come together, but we also are very aware of the gaps that we have. And I believe that when we really look at those, and when we stop and not jump over them, when we really sit with those things, then we start to connect. When we start to realize, I don't trust you, then those start to open up and you go, why? And the other person may touch back and say, I'm scared too. And the connections start to be made again. The piece on the right is actually a combined work of me and Rose's. We decided that we had a common language, a language of clay. And when we start arguing or butting heads like mothers and daughters can do, we decided, hey, let's work it out through clay language. She's yelling at me, actually, in this one. She's on the left, I'm on the right, cowering at her. She's a good argumenter. She's always wins. The first piece we decided to do, actually, was about our birth story, her birth story. And given that I was there, being her mother, we decided, let's redo it. And she had trouble going, well, you didn't, my birth wasn't good. That's why I have all these issues. So I said, well, let's redo it. So I'll make me the big mom, and you make you the baby, and you put the baby inside the mama sculpture, and we will feel it and heal whatever happened in the birth story that happened. So it's like, good idea. So she was making her baby self, perfect, of course. I was making my mama self, trying to make her loving and like nurturing, and I'm going to show her how much I love her as a mama. Well, my piece was having some trouble. First, the head fell off. But I thought, that's okay, it's okay, I can glue it on later. But then, it's a large piece. It was, so big, and I decided, well, I'm going to take this piece to the bathtub kiln to fire it. Carefully put it in the back of the truck, because I couldn't fit it anywhere but the back of a truck. Put it there, and I was driving out. I had to drive about, 10 minutes down the road, driving really carefully. And this truck pulls in right in front of me. I had to do a quick brake. That sculpture went boom into the back of the truck bed. And of course, the legs fell off. So there was the head and the legs fell off, and I went, don't tell Rose. I can glue it later. So I put the legs in the kiln, the head and the body, fired it. You have those little cone setters that you can put in, and then they go off, click off, and so I set it all ready. It's all good, I can glue it tomorrow. Went to bed. Next morning I get up, go check the kiln to see how well it fired. It's still on. One of those moments where you go, nightmares that all potters have, the kiln overfired. Well, amazingly, what happened was the dog ran by, knocked a chair over, the chair hit right exactly where the turn-off thing goes and stopped it from turning itself off. So pulled the chair out, click! At least I didn't burn the place down. And so I was just devastated, and I was still too scared to tell Rose. So I just waited till it cooled off enough to peek inside. Slowly peeked inside to see my ruined kiln, and lo and behold, it looked like a giant chocolate mom melted in the bottom. But it was still visible, you could still tell it was a person. So I had to go face Rose. I called her, I says, Rose, it melted, it broke. Everything that could happen to it happened. And she goes, it happened again. Oh. But the weirdest part of the whole thing was that she came over, we took the piece out, and she brought her perfect little baby piece. I took my melted, broken pieces and put them down on the ground, and she brought her baby self, put them in the ruins of me. And we had a good cry. And the most amazing thing about it is that she looked at me at that point and she said, because I told her all the things that happened, which I didn't mean for it to happen, and she realized it wasn't your fault. So it was a healing thing. And it ended up to be one of our most powerful pieces, this melted mother piece holding this beautiful child in the middle of her ruined self. So I love working with Rose. She speaks my language. So when we get too far away from connection and get too busy being something we're not, I think our imagination gets limited for fear of being, different. When we're trying to fit in, we try to, stay on that line. But I think staying on that line keeps our imaginations dim. We grab hold of sides, we grab hold of causes to fit in and feel right. We fight each other no matter what until, we made a mess of our world. But beyond the extreme polarities, wars, human-made environmental catastrophes, I believe the root of most of these situations have to do with the lack of self-love and self-expression we feel, or rather, avoid feeling. I wonder what would happen if we just stopped and let ourselves cry, and really cry. It might help us find our childhood self again. It might help us find who we are and what we have really to give. We need new ideals of how to live better on this planet. So how are we going to find these new ways if we're stuck in the old thinking of this sinking ship? Before you knew of money and the American dream, can you remember that child who wandered outside and was completely in awe of the world that you were in? You allowed yourself to be present enough to experience the sun on your face, the sounds and smells that led to a tree or a rock or a mud puddle. You had no meeting to rush off to. Time and schedules don't matter. You just have to exist. You are enough. The world is enough. Do you remember? I never did get much of a formal education and can't tell you about the chemical compositions of clay bodies and glazes to save my life. But I do know a hill with a gray strip of some of the finest clay that vitrifies at a pretty low heat and can fire to a pretty high temperature without melting. And I don't have to add anything to it to create a pot that you can put over a fire and cook your beans in. I can't tell you the names of the famous ceramists of the decade, but I can remember my mother's hands covered with wet clay as she made something she saw as beautiful. Those pots outlived her and shine her light without ever mentioning her name. They comfort me as she did. I'm very proud of my honorary doctorate, but it doesn't change who I am. My children went off to colleges, and I reluctantly went to yet another one of their graduations. But what I remember the most fondly is building an adobe wall together to make us a home, mixing clay and sand together just right so that when it dried, it was hard as stone, and when the rains came, it smelled of heaven. I remember my babies mixing this mortar to lay adobe bricks by playing in the mud. All I had to do was add water to the dry pile. They did the rest. I still live in the house we built together, Mother Earth, babies, and me. How sweet it is to be earth mixed with water by little hands and feet, rather than by cold machines or men in hard hats. Nambi Jianong Kwijo Kuta Disigiang. Thank you, Mother Earth, for loving me. What if we were all allowed to build our homes from our own connection to place? What would you build? What would your hands shape? I recently saw this quote: "The creative adult is the child that never grew up." I couldn't agree more. This piece I'm working on is called Admiration. She's admiring what she made, a bowl. And I think that, it's a self-love to, create something, stand back and admire it and go, wow, look what I made, look what I did. I did a large adobe piece for the Denver Art Museum. We built it in place because we couldn't get it through the elevator or doors, 14-foot high piece. It was first sewed together with straw, and then we added clay mud on top of it. But I invited the public to come help. So I had a lot of little kids mixing mud on the 3rd floor. But they were just having the greatest time putting mud on that piece. But the coolest part about it was that they would leave after washing their hands and come back the next day, dragging their grandparents or their parents or whoever, and pull them in there and go, "Look what I made." And I realized that that whole community claimed that piece. So it wasn't just me making that piece, it was all of them. And that mattered. And it taught me something. It taught me about why, my community I came from really made an effort to include people. Even to this day, we have potters and people that are well known for maybe their pottery, but the piece was made by their whole family because they found out that, somebody really does the coils real good, and somebody else polishes really good, and somebody else does designs really nice. So they kind of pass the piece around, and then the one that is known in public the most gets to sign it because it makes them more money. But it's a community effort. But some people go, you can't do that, that's plagiarism or whatever. But for our community-based thinking, that's correct. You don't leave anybody out because everybody needs to feel important in it. And that starts with you. And you is the first one that needs to admire itself. And so admiring ourselves for who we really are, not some facade, but a tearing down to the roots of who we are, is really the only place we connect to each other. We don't connect in surfaces. We connect in our hearts. I teach some sculpting classes. Every once in a great while, I gather some people together and we have fun with clay. But I start them out with this little trick. I sit them all in a circle, and everyone is given a small piece of clay, just a little tiny piece to hold in their hands. But they have to hold it in their hands and keep their eyes closed. They cannot open their eyes. They are to introduce themselves to the clay without looking. This helps them to feel instead of think. I ask them to remember what it was like when they were very young, how it felt to touch the clay or mud for the first time, what it felt like before they knew. We're all full of knowing. It's like, can you get back to before you knew? And just stay present in their feelings with this damp clay in their hands. They play with it however they feel they need to understand it from this sensation place. Keeping their eyes closed helps them stay in their bodies. After they make a small pinch pot, they are asked to hand this little pot to the person to their right. So everyone goes, dunk. Everyone now has someone else's pot in their hands. Without changing it, eyes still closed, you never open your eyes, they feel the difference of this little pot to theirs. The shape, the size, the wetness, even the temperature can be different. They pass again to their right, over and over again, until they come back to their own pot. They always know when their pot comes back. You usually hear someone say, "Oh my goodness, this is mine." It fits their fingers. The texture and shape is theirs. The clay reflected themselves back, and they saw it without looking. They felt it. Same bag of clay, infinite imprints. As they build their pieces for the next week, I have found that when my students are having problems moving the clay or struggling with their ideals of how it's supposed to look, I make them close their eyes again and work without looking. I make them get down on the floor and feel their bodies in the positions of their pieces. I sometimes request them to sit for a while, to remember to connect with their feelings instead of being up in their heads with a set ideal. Over and over again, the pieces that come out the best are from the students who were able to let go and just be there, be present. They were able to believe in themselves, or at least be curious enough to find out what was inside them. Those students were so amazed at what they were able to make. And judgment remained only in those that couldn't find their inner child or a willingness to be themselves. I did an experiment with one class after they finished their pieces. We lined the sculptures along one side of the room and had the students stand at the other side of the room. A group of college kids dropped by the gallery that day, and I asked them to assist us in this experiment. Without knowing who made which pieces, we asked the college group to match the sculptures with the person who made them. No words were passed, no hint was given. The college students studied the pieces and then looked over at the people. Within only 10 minutes, every single piece was perfectly matched with its owner. Our experiment showed how beautiful clay soaks in the energy of whomever is touching it. It's a connecting thing. It's a feeling thing. So as we move forward into tomorrow, I would like to invite us to be ourselves, truly ourselves, in all the ways we were first born to be. I dare us to remember how to stand before our Jianeng Guizhou, our clay mother, and introduce ourselves to her again, or introduce ourselves for the first time. But this time, don't hide, and don't try to be something other than just yourself, because she sees you anyway. She wants to shine through you, with you. So imagine what we can do together. Only change the world. Thank you.